Well, guys, the wait is finally over. After 3 long years, Dune Part 2 has officially been released. And if you didn't know that, then you might have been living under a rock for a while. The release of this movie has come with some major hype. Some fans have been saying it's the best movie they've ever seen. Some critics have been saying it's like seeing Star Wars for the first time. And now that I've seen the movie myself, I have a bold statement to make. Dune Part 2 will go down as one of the most divisive movies of all time. And I'm talking The Last Jedi level divisive. In this video, I'm going to break down the events of Dune Part 2 and share why I think that the audience will be split down the middle. But before I get started, I'd like to ask you guys to please remember to like and subscribe. We're on the road to 1,000 subs, and we'd appreciate your support. Without further ado, let's get into it. To get started, let's look at some of Dune Part 2's positives. The very first thing I want to say is that this movie is absolutely beautiful. From the cinematography, the filming locations, the man-made sets, even the music. Every aspect of this movie was crafted with immense attention to detail. And because of that, this movie is as immersive as it gets. Sitting in the movie theater, it's nearly impossible not to be drawn into this film. It's one of those movies that your muscles start to relax and you sink deeper and deeper into your chair as the movie just takes you over. This in part is due to how visually stunning the movie is. From the lighting to the actual sets themselves, the minds behind this movie work some huge magic to make the audience feel like they're actually on an alien planet. The way this movie is filmed and the way it looks, it almost makes the harsh desert of Arrakis begin to seem beautiful. Despite how dangerous and empty it is, you can't escape its spirit. And that, of course, ties in with the many religious aspects of the film. And with that, you begin to understand why the Fremen fight so hard for their planet. It truly is very impressive that the masterminds behind this film could make such a terrible, hostile place feel like home, even for us, the fans. I personally believe this all spans from watching Paul Atreides learn how to live like a Fremen, and then on top of that, his eventual romance with Chani. You come to appreciate how clever and resourceful the Fremen are, and the fact that they have found ways to survive in these extreme conditions, but not only just survive, but thrive and live and find time for love and relationships. It's all just super impressive. But despite how visually captivating this movie is, it does not come close to the music that scores it. Hans Zimmer was the composer of Dune Part 2's soundtrack, and it's safe to say that he has outdone himself once again. This movie, and I mean this wholeheartedly, was by far one of the loudest I have ever seen. And the music had a way of amplifying all the emotions you're supposed to feel while watching. The haunting chanting gave a mystical feel to the entire movie. It made everything seem foreign and mysterious. It also had an interesting blend of tribal and synthetic sounds that helped provide Arrakis with its own voice in some ways. And in terms of combat, each battle scene was magnified by a booming sounds that never let you get too comfortable. It was always fast-paced and dangerous, and it gave you the feeling that nobody was safe, not even a main character. In general, I am a massive fan of Hans Zimmer's work. He has given us the music for The Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar, Gladiator, and so many more. And I'm here to say his work on Dune Part 2 could be some of his best. Now, if we look past all the fancy cinematography and other keywords that go into making a movie, and we look at the people involved, it's safe to say that Dune Part 2 had a star-studded cast. With Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Stellan Skarsgård, Florence Pugh, Javier Bardem, Dave Bautista, Josh Brolin, Rebecca Ferguson, Austin Butler, and even Christopher Walken, this cast does not seem to have any weaknesses. Now, to be fair, I'm not saying everybody's performance was as amazing as the others, but for the most part, this movie had talent on talent. Personally, I think the top performers of this movie were Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, and Javier Bardem. I was enthralled by their performances and found them all to be believable despite the genre of movie they were all performing in. Timothée Chalamet stepped up big time in this movie for me. I think he grew into the leading role and showed surprising depth, especially after he ingested the blue worm juice. You know, the sadness in his eyes, the aggression that he acted with, even his detached demeanor, all of these things were incredibly well done, and I was surprised how believable he was in this role. The same can be said about Rebecca Ferguson's portrayal of Lady Jessica. I was shocked with how intense her character became in this film. She seemed an odd mixture of crazy and clairvoyant, and she found a way to walk that line really well. And then, of course, Javier Bardem's portrayal of Stilgar. Well, you guys know, he's already become a meme, and despite how silly it was to hear him say, Lisan al-Gaib, every 30 seconds, he still brought intensity and commitment to playing a devoted follower, and he kind of was the main reason this movie was able to pull off its religious tone. He showed what desperation can lead a man to do, especially if he's acting solely based on faith. He was a major driving force in this movie, and I actually enjoyed his performance. Now, I know I already mentioned the action in this movie, but I do want to highlight one thing. Yes, the action in this movie was definitely toned down in comparison to the first one. And I think it actually works to this movie's advantage. While there was less fighting, in my opinion, in this movie, we actually know the groups of people who are fighting each other. So we actually have a reason to be emotionally invested when they fight. We feel pride when the hero wins and sadness when they lose, or worse, die. This was epitomized during the last fight between Paul Atreides and the Harkonnen Prince. This fight scene was physically impressive, don't get me wrong. But even more importantly, it was emotionally driven. At this point in the film, you're concerned about Paul Atreides. You can't tell, is he sane? Is he crazy? Maybe he's just overconfident, or is he planning on actually sacrificing himself here for a future that he didn't tell us about? These questions make the fight scene interesting and impactful, because we don't know what's going to happen. You know, usually the good guy, you make it to the end of the movie and he's safe. But in this instance, we don't even know if Paul Atreides is good anymore. And me personally, I definitely didn't know if he was going to survive or not. In general, though, I do think the combat, especially the hand-to-hand stuff between the Harkonnens and the Fremen throughout the entire movie was great. I know it wasn't on display too much, but when it was there, it was done really well. Now, if you allow me to do a complete 180, despite the fact that I've just heaped a ton of praise on this movie, I do have to break some bad news. This movie, while great, is not perfect, and I do have some negatives that I do want to share with you guys. And listen, I know people are obsessed with this movie right now, and I'm going to hurt people's feelings when I say their favorite movie isn't perfect. But just listen, go easy on me. I loved the movie too. This is just my personal opinion. It doesn't invalidate whatever you guys feel, okay? The first flaw that I noticed with this movie was the inconsistent pacing. This was a stop and start movie if I'd ever seen one. Whereas most movies follow a long arcing storyline where the action slowly builds, then peaks, and then drops again, this movie instead more resembled a set of stairs, where the action would quickly build and then stop, and then quickly build and then stop, and then repeat over and over. I found it to be an odd choice. It was one of the only things that could kind of stop me from being engaged in the movie, especially because I'm not a huge fan of that style of storytelling. This went for many of the plot points throughout the movie, and it gave it a very jumbled feel. It was especially apparent when they were building a massive battle for the end of the movie between the Fremen and the Harkonnens, and we barely got to see any of it. And I know, maybe this was all the director's plan. He wanted it to be jarring and it to be scattered because that's how the characters were feeling in the movie. And that's cool and all. It's just not really my type of thing. That also leads me to my next critique. In a similar fashion, Dune Part 2 would introduce a topic or a theme or an item, let's say. They would use it for a moment and then they would move on without any explanation. Some specific examples could be Lady Jessica's baby was randomly speaking to her and controlling what she does, and then they never talked about it again. Or the desert walk that Paul Atreides had to complete to become a Fremen, and they completely skipped. Or the fact that the Atreides army had 97 nukes hiding on Arrakis. 97. and they were never ever mentioned before or even after they were used. Like, how in the world did they get there? Why were they not used when the Harkonnens attacked? You can't tell me that when the Harkonnens invaded, it all happened too fast and they couldn't get to them in time. Because they activated every other single type of defense mechanism they had, and they could hit one more button and send some nukes up into space. Come on. One side note that I do want to also mention is I've read a lot of people complaining about Austin Butler's performance in the movie and the weird black and white Harkonnen planet scene. To be honest, I didn't really have a problem with Austin Butler's portrayal of the Harkonnen prince. You know, he was unhinged, he was super creepy, and I'm sure that's who he was supposed to be. You know, the whole kissing his uncle on the lips twice, you know, that part was definitely an odd creative choice, but regardless, I thought he did fine. And then the black and white planet, on the other hand, that I found to be a bit corny. I liked the scene in general. You know, it was sad to see the last amazing warriors of House Atreides drugged and beaten to the point where they could hardly walk. And it really fueled my hatred for the Harkonnens because I had to watch them get killed in an unfair fight. But making their world black and white with some pretty poor CGI, especially for today's standards, it was a big miss for me. Especially since this scene was surrounded by an otherwise beautiful movie. Like, it only amplified how bad this part looked. I'm thrilled they kept the scene in the movie. I really enjoyed it. But I would have much rather they just kept the colors normal and just moved on from there. So you may be sitting here wondering, Joe, you said this was going to be the most divisive movie of all time, and all we've gotten are some pros and cons. So what's going on? And I'm going to say this. Take a closer look at my pros and cons. The two sides of this film basically make up the two sides of movie audiences. On one hand, some fans just want to be visually amazed and to feel immersed in a film. Others want details and logic that connects and adds meaning. I'm not saying this movie can't or didn't do both, but I will say they do walk a fine line of going one way or another. Some people will be blown away by the things that they see. The beauty of this film will block out any and all flaws that it may have. For others, the inconsistencies in the pacing will prevent them from seeing what is truly a beautiful movie. And this is all made completely worse because of how popular the movie is becoming. The people who enjoy this film don't just like it, they love it. I've seen many reviews calling this movie the greatest sequel of all time, better even than The Empire Strikes Back. And when you enter a movie into the GOAT conversation, you're bound to have conflict. The people who don't like this film seem to be labeling it an inconsistent and disconnected stereotypical blockbuster. For these people, it not only doesn't belong in the GOAT conversation, but it isn't even a good movie to begin with. Because of the passion behind both fan groups and the different aspects of this film with the visual beauty and the storytelling, I see this being a debate for quite a while. And because of that, the conversation will only grow more and more heated with time. So I guess to sum it all up, without hurting too many people's feelings, I thought this movie was an experience. Something that needs to be seen, preferably on an IMAX screen. It had so many unique and exciting qualities to it, and I really enjoyed watching it. But, with that being said, I do not think this belongs in the greatest sequel of all time conversation. I think the pacing was a big problem for the movie, and there were just too many times where things went unexplained or unused or ignored. And for those reasons, I classify this movie as a great film, but not the greatest film. Well guys, this was my review of Dune Part 2. What did you guys think? Do you agree with me? Is this movie great, but not the greatest? Or is this one of the best movies you've ever seen? Let me know in the comments how you feel about my breakdown and how you feel about the movie in general. Please also remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks again for watching, guys. We appreciate you, and we'll catch you next time on the third floor.